to hide it as much as possible. So, like, you can make believe we don't have mics.
You want to open this up, Daniel? I'm not going to say a word because I got to change mics. You want to open it up? Let me just say, let me see if we can hear you. And then I'll turn you up. You ready?
Hold on here. Let me. You mind clipping this?
Sure.
Where it doesn't look weird.
Well, you got to get a clip so it's facing you.
Yeah.
Let's go this way. Oop. Pull the wire down a little.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
Okay, there you go. Now that's beautiful. Look at that.
Ooh.
Beautiful. I wish mine was that good.
Yeah, you look great.
Say test, guys.
Test,
Test.
guys.
Test, guys. Well, now actually, Alan looks like you. I don't know.
Should I move?
Maybe you should move in towards me just a hair.
Oh, they
Forward?
can hear you. All right, that's good.
Like forward? Yeah.
All right, you guys ready,
Good.
gentlemen?
You want to open it, or you want me to introduce you?
You guys open.
Sure.
Whatever you want to do. It's
Okay.
You're the host. You could
Yeah, I guess so. I guess that's my job. Huh? All right. Start.
I think we're on.
We're on? Okay. I'm very pleased today to have Daniel Glass with me. And he's honored me with the position of being his host, which I think is...
I requested it.
You requested it. Huh?
Absolutely, man.
Well,
I mean, you know, it's a,
well,
it's a
I'm
wonderful opportunity for me.
I'm extremely flattered that you thought of me, and I'm very happy to be here. So I'd like to present to you Mr. Daniel Glass.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say thanks to Matt, who's off camera, for throwing this little shindig together, and to Alan for kindly joining me. Alan and I just met for the first time yesterday. Actually, we had lunch and had a chance to kind of get our bearings in sync, and they're in sync, man.
Yeah.
It's really cool. It's great to meet you, and I've been an admirer of yours for a long time. Been watching you on the Facebook and how you do your thing, and so I'm honored. You know.
Well, if I knew that, I would have been a lot more nervous about it.
That's all good. Essentially, this whole thing arose from, in the last few years of his life, Freddie Gruber became something of a legendary figure in a way, a larger-than-life figure. And I think that said, he never documented what he did as a teacher. And prior to that time, he really had not been an active player for a number of years. And so there is not much that actually show Freddie doing his thing.
I've been trying to find some material for years, and I haven't been able to come across anything.
Yeah,
other than the videos he's done with Dave or with Neil.
Right, in which he talks mostly and sort of talks in riddles in a way, and it's very kind of confusing. It's not straightforward. Let's put it that way.
Oh, not at all. No.
So, in light of this, I was, I had the good fortune to hit Freddie at a good time. I had just got done with music school in 1991. I went to the Dick Grove School of Music for a year, and when I got out, I felt like I wanted to continue my studies, and a number of people had recommended Freddie, kind of people in the know, around Los Angeles, and I said, I got to check this guy out, and I had seen him one time at a John Hernandez clinic, Johnny Vatos Hernandez, Oingo Boingo drummer, really great drummer, terrific guy and a longtime student of Freddie. So I went to his clinic at Cal State Northridge, and there was this odd-looking fellow on the side of the stage with giant glasses, a T-shirt that looked like it had been in the wash about 900 times. It was threadbare, pants kind of up to here, and he's standing there like this watching the clinic. And John introduced him, and I said, "This is the famous Freddie Gruber? Wow, interesting." So anyway, I thought what we could do today is first maybe do a little talking. I could explain a little bit more about Freddie's life, um, and sort of give a little bit more of his past, because you know, like I said, he only really became known to the general public sort of in the last few years of his life when, you know, guys like Neil Peart and Dave Weckl, you know, very big name guys were singing
Steve
his
Smith.
praises. Steve Smith,
Steve,
of
yeah.
course, who was a long-term student of Freddie's.
Yeah.
Um, but in reality, Freddie actually was a very known quantity long before that time. And so what I should say is that Freddie he came up in New York City, born in New York, is a real New Yorker like yourself.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And in the 1940s, you know, when bebop was really starting to hit, he was a young, probably a teenager around that time. I mean, the two things I should say right off the bat before I get into all of this is that A, I am not putting myself out as the ultimate authority on Freddie. I just, you know, want to be clear about that. You know, Freddie changed and evolved and grew as a teacher, as a person. So if you studied with him in the 60s or the 70s, it was different than if you studied with him in the 80s or the 90s. Everyone had a different experience. And one of the things about Freddie that made him really cool was that it wasn't a cookie cutter kind of a system. He really based a lot of his instruction on each person's individual where they were at. Need,
yeah.
Exactly. And those are all reasons why it was difficult to codify what he did in a nice, clean video, you know, or a book. So that's the first thing, is that my you know, my experiences of Freddie are just that, my experiences of Freddie. Other students of his may have different experiences.
Well, I'm just happy to be able to talk to one of his students and discuss him and get to know a little bit more about him and what he was professing as well. Because I haven't been able to do that up till now. I mean, you know, I'm not a friend of Steve Smith. I'm not a friend of Dave Weckl. I mean, you know, I'm very happy that I got to make a friendship with you. So please enlighten us.
Yeah. So in the 1940s, Freddie was running around New York. At that time, he was a young man, and he was happening. He was playing with a lot of you know, he was in the heart of it. He was from a very, very early age very good friends with Buddy Rich and around Henry Adler. Was a great, you know, one of the genius, legendary educators, as it were. And was soaking it all up. And there's some photos of Freddie. If you go on, you know, a lot of people say, well, you know, what was his playing like? I mean, if you go on Drummer World, there's a lot of good pictures of Freddie in younger years, Freddie. And he was actually written up in Downbeat as being an exceptional player. And the way they describe his playing, they describe a guy who was already doing very polyrhythmic things, for which Elvin, you know, and guys like that would become known for in the 50s and 60s.
I saw a video of Jim Chapin, who was asked about Freddie, and he said that Freddie was ahead of his time.
Yes.
And he tried to. He said he couldn't even demonstrate how Freddie played because
that's a great, where he sings Freddie's way of playing.
Where he sings how he would play, and Jim admitted that he was so disciplined. I mean, Freddie was outside of the normal discipline, which I personally like, because that's what I'm trying to do too. I'm trying to get outside of the way people approach the drums normally.
Yeah.
And that's one thing about Freddie that intrigued me and interested me in finding out more about him.
So one of the things about Freddie, you know, the reason why he at that point didn't become a better known player, you know, and I think it's safe to mention this. I mean, he did get involved with some of the darker side of bebop, you know, which is a lot of the guys use drugs, you know, heroin in particular. That was part of the scene. You kind of experienced not literally that, but saw how it affected people's lives.
I knew some of the guys, you know, and yeah.
And that was just I was kind of a part of that culture, bebop culture, back at that time period. So Freddie kind of, to get out of that, the first time he left New York and went out to California was sometime in the early 50s. And that's when he started kind of having more of a presence in California. And I think he started really teaching, you know, by the 1960s. And some of his early students include Don Lombardi, you know, the founder of DW, who was very close with Freddie for 50 years, was a student of Freddie's. And actually, Freddie gave him some of the seed money to start DW. back in the day.
Wow.
So Freddie was a stockholder in DW,
I didn't know
which
that.
not many people know.
Yeah.
And in the 60s, that's when he really like started working with some guys that really, became well-known guys. The famous big band leader Don Ellis, some of you may know, who like worked in Crazy Odd Time signatures. He was very forward-thinking big band leader in the late 60s, early 70s. John Guerin was one of the great session guys, played with Joni Mitchell and Tom Scott. John Hernandez, Mike Baird, who was a very well-known session guy, particularly in the 70s and 80s, and the list goes on and on of guys that studied with Freddie. So by the time it gets to me in 1992 was when I first called him. He was a very well-known entity, and you'd go to his house, and I was telling you some of this yesterday. I mean, it was a real experience, and I think it's hard. I could go on about Freddie. I don't want to spend too much time talking about it, but I think talking about his history a little bit, and he bought back and forth. He had a place, he had an apartment in New York the whole time I knew him, and for years before that. So he had a presence in New York and in L.A. He had students on both coasts. Adam Nussbaum,
Adam,
hung with Freddie, worked with him, Anton Fig, Cindy Blackman. Whether these people were technically his students, I don't know. I can't say to that, but they all knew him for sure. On the West Coast, Keltner, Erskine, his memorial when he passed away was like a who's who of guys. Ed Shaughnessy, of course, Neil was there, but it really was, he was a very beloved figure. But he was an eccentric figure for sure, and you could see that when you see some of the videos of him. He didn't talk in a straight line. He talked like this, and that made it really hard to access him. A lot of people, I think, would meet him or come and want to study with him, and say after they just couldn't handle it. It took a lot of patience. It took a lot of you had to submit to Freddie's world in a way, for better and for worse, for sure. I think. What I told you yesterday, in the Rush documentary, they talk about Freddie. Neil describes him as the Yoda of drumming, right? And I told you this story yesterday, but I think it's a very apt description, because if you think about the Star Wars film, Luke Skywalker, he goes to this dark, jungly planet. It's not a pretty place, and he meets a teacher who speaks backwards and talks in riddles, and he doesn't understand what the hell's going on, and he forces him to do a lot of strange things, and he doesn't know why he's having to do them. Why does this have to do with me being a better fighter or whatever? And he's teaching him wisdom, and things like that. And at the end of the day, he emerges from this planet, and he's a Jedi. He's equipped with like what I call the dark arts. And I think what I found so engaging about Freddie, from my personal experience, I joined the band Royal Crown Review. I started working with the guys in '93, and I joined the band in '94. And Freddie I started with in '92, so it was all happening around the same time. I was studying with Freddie, and I was starting to play with these guys. And what was so cool about Royal Crown Review was that these guys were serious students of history. We were seeking. We were, on every level. We were going to the antique malls and buying tie bars and old pulp novels and giant vinyl collections and old cars and old jukeboxes, and really absorbing ourselves in 20th century classic culture, and at the same time devouring the music and trying to understand, so that when we played it, we were really coming from an authentic place, even though we were younger guys. And what we liked about that music, and I think what sold the band, and indeed what sold kind of the retro swing resurgence, was that we found the rock and roll in that music, whereas most people today, or at least when I was a kid, I thought of old people's music. Oh well, swing music, that's for old people. What does that have to do with me, a young person? And what we discovered in that music was that this shit rocked,
Well, from what I know, the early rock and roll days, all those recordings in Motown or whatever, these guys were jazz players.
They were all, yeah, for sure. And they put, so it was young people's music in its day, right? And as every style.
Played by old farts, but basically.
Well, no, but at some point, the swing era guys were young guys, and they were the young radical generation
then, yes,
of the 30s, So anyway, what I liked was that I was exploring this with Royal Crown Review, and then I was going to Freddie, and I was going to Planet Freddie, and it really was like that. You'd go into his house, and Freddie was completely committed. He didn't have a family, he didn't have kids. All he had was a very rich life of music. He was, teaching. He had his students. He had his friends. He was loved in the scene. He would. It was just music 24/7, and with him there was no on the clock, off the clock. I told Alan again this story yesterday that sometimes I would go for lessons at 5 o'clock. He'd say, show up at 5 o'clock. And he was the type of guy. He was, he wouldn't get up till 2 in the afternoon, but he'd go to bed at 5 in the morning. And that's again kind of old school musician schedule, right? And so if you wanted to hang, you kind of had to get on that schedule to some degree. So you show up at 5, there would be 2 other students ahead of me, and I'd have to wait till they had their lessons, and it was, it was incredible people was at his house. Danny Yamamoto, I remember, was there from the band Hiroshima, the well-known kind of new age world music kind of band. Then Joey Waronker would be there for a lesson, who plays with REM now, son of Lenny Waronker, a great studio drummer. One time, knock on the door, Ian Wallace walks in, King Crimson drummer, and he says to Freddie, "Dad." Those are the first words out of his mouth. Give him a hug. So you were around, and of course Bruce Becker was there. Bruce is probably the best, equipped to teach Freddie's material. He was in Europe, living in Europe at the time, but he would come in and he would sit down and demonstrate stuff for me that would just knock me out. So there were all these guys, and Freddie's regular crew. So you would just hang, and in between lessons, Freddie would come out for an hour and a half, and we would talk about politics and music and the news and life and economics and philosophy. He was a very deep thinker, but again, he wouldn't directly hand you anything. He would talk in riddles like Yoda, and after a while, you would start to go, "Oh, I think I get what he's talking about," So he, as a teacher, he was trying to paint a very big picture, and me as a young student, it took me a while to begin to understand the largeness of that picture, both technically and musically. And so I say to my own students, that I learned so much more. I learned about the drum set as an instrument, and I think once we get into some technical talk, you certainly have been through this transformation yourself and have a lot of great thoughts and ideas about it. But thinking about, the biggest thing I think, and we had this discussion yesterday, if you want to talk about sitting behind a drum set and playing, and the body is a mechanical instrument, and how it moves is, it's going to move more naturally in some ways than others. And I think that, although Freddie seemed very disorganized, his house was a mess, there was piles of stuff everywhere, it would take, sometimes just to finish that last story, I'd get home from my lesson at 7 o'clock the next morning, or 9 a.m. I remember one time driving home. That was like ridiculous, the latest. But I'd had a 6-hour lesson with him between 3 and 9, And we took breaks, or we'd go to the store, we'd do whatever. But the amount I would get out of the experience, the hang, wasn't just 1 hour on a pad with some stuff, That was the priceless part of it. And I'd ask him everything about the stuff I was learning with Royal Crown. I did a huge study on Papa Joe, and he knew Papa Joe and hung out with Papa Joe. And Philly Joe, Philly Joe was his buddy. Philadelphia Joe Jones, that's what how he would refer to him. But the two of them he would tell me they would sit in a garage, above a garage in this little dumpy apartment in Spanish Harlem with the pad between them, working on Wilcoxon, all day. That's the kind of guys he was hanging out with, and that's the kind of stuff he was doing. So I wanted that, So to get back to this idea of big picture, which I think if we want to maybe start a discussion of maybe more technically oriented discussion, what I took away, and again, I studied with Freddie from say 92 probably into 97. And by the time 96, 97, I was too busy on the road with RCR, and the solo lessons fell away. And then by the time I had time to do it again, Freddie wasn't really teaching anymore in the early 2000s. But so it's been many years since then, and I've worked with Bruce some, and just I think for me, my own teaching, I do a lot of teaching on Skype, and I teach the fundamental core of what I learned from Freddie as far as hand technique. And I've brought a lot of it into it, because studying the history as much as I have, it's allowed me to sort of, again, see things in my own big picture and plug those
I
things
have to
in.
say, I mean, I'm very interested in the technical approach, but the history is fascinating.
Yeah,
So please, continue if you may.
yeah.
If you
Well, I like to say, from what I learned, from Freddie, and I had a very interesting talk. Steve Smith and I have become very good friends in the last few years because we wrote this book together, The Roots of Rock Drumming. And what Steve's thesis is, or an idea he put out, which I really agree, is that somewhere around the 1960s, when rock and roll really took over, and the drums got bigger, we got double ply, pinstripe type heads that ate up all the overtones. The technology in a recording studio got better. Suddenly, drummers didn't have to take responsibility anymore for the sound of their instrument, and they didn't really have to have technique anymore, because if you just hit a drum, well, the guy could dial in reverb and echo after the fact, or if you're playing live, they can make you sound huge, and your drum head would eat up all the overtones if you weren't hitting it right. Then you could close mic everything, so you could really
control
everything. So in the end, the sound of the drummer, and we all know in the studio around that time, the engineer became almost more important than the drummer, because
not
it was
almost,
all about,
definitely more important.
yeah, I mean, it was about deadening the drums.
Yeah, I mean, if there was an issue,
Taking
a
the head
difference of
off.
an opinion, the
Right.
engineer always won.
Yeah, and it was about, you just play the drums and we'll get a good sound afterwards, essentially. And to a large degree, the technology allows them to do that.
As opposed to the old days where they put one mic up in the middle of the room,
Exactly.
and everybody was responsible to balance not only their own instrument, but with everybody else in the room.
And the drummer, we're playing 4, 5, 6 instruments at once. We have to EQ ourselves, right?
Right.
So I think, and this is what Steve and I were talking about, in the 60s, in general, drummers lost that connection to their instrument. It doesn't mean there weren't a lot of great drummers, but what it meant was that in general, I call it the dark arts. That's the Yoda Jedi experience that I learned from Freddie.
Well, I have to tell you that I have no muffle on my drums at all. I have double-headed, and I don't do anything to them.
I don't port the kick.
Don't port it. No, I don't put anything on the heads at all. I let them ring as much as possible. I try to use the overtones as part of my palette.
Exactly, and I agree 100%. And it's not to say that doing any of this stuff is wrong. I don't want anybody who's watching this to think that, you have to set up the way I set up. Because what's great about Freddie is that he taught Mark Schulman, one of the world's great rock drummers. He taught, Neil Peart, one of the world's great rock drummers, who really isn't a jazzer. He dabbles in jazz, but that's not his thing. He taught Steve Smith, one of the world's great, fusion drummers. He, worked with,
Dave Weckl.
Not just jazz guys. And I think a lot of what that made me come away with is that what he's doing is he's teaching you how to fish. He's not giving you the fish. So it doesn't matter what kind of music you play, it's applicable.
Well,
it's universal principles.
I mean, technique is technique. There is no rock and roll technique and jazz technique, and it's all a fundamental that works everywhere.
I agree 100%.
If you're doing it in a way that's natural for your body and using the natural physics of the universe, I mean, it's going to work no matter what you play.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, a balance point is a balance point.
It's a balance point. You can't. I mean,
gravity.
You go to the other side of the universe, and you try to find me a place where there's no gravity.
Right. But like I always say to my students, gravity is a perfect force. It's perfect.
Yeah.
Like, let's take advantage of that so that we can be perfect. Like,
it also has disadvantages that you have to adjust for. It's advantageous on the way down and disadvantageous on the way up.
Right. But I think the biggest problem with drummers in general, and this is what I really had to overcome when I say with Freddie, is that we are so focused on down, 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 we don't think at all about the up. And in reality, if we think much more about the up and let the down happen, let the perfection of gravity guide us, then pow, we're saving ourselves a lot of, we're allowing ourselves to utilize these perfect forces, right? So in any case, what I feel like I walked away with from my experience and how it totally just blew my mind, I felt like I had been, this is another, I think, good analogy, is that in general, when we study drums, when a person goes and studies drums, what do they learn today? What they learn is pick up these two sticks. Okay, now here's how you play a rock groove. Here's how you play a funk groove. Here's how you play a jazz groove. Here's how you get your four limbs to do interesting combinations of things that'll fit into a style. And what we don't learn at all are scales and embouchure and a tone and a sound, things that other instrumentalists spend years working on. We don't even bother with that. We rush right to the, to the sexy stuff.
I separated. I separated into basic strokes and then choreography that you use the strokes in.
Yes, how to move from place to place.
It's different than actually learning how to work the stroke itself.
Yes, absolutely. And, I think in terms of how I have utilized the Freddie stuff, I think of it componentially, components, So another good analogy is, what we're building here is a high-performance sports car, ideally, hopefully. We're building a Ferrari. But, a Ferrari doesn't just fall fully formed from the sky. You've got to, first you got to build the engine, and within the engine you've got the different components, the pistons and the fuel injection and whatever else, the moving parts. So those have to be dealt with first. And I tell my students, and as what I learned with Freddie, it took me a long time to understand that, don't try to see the big picture first. Work on these little tiny micro components and get them to start to work with each other, and gradually, it will filter into what you're doing. So
Stone used the same approach. I mean, you worked on wrist first, and then after you got your wrist down, you learned how to use your arms, and then when you got your arms down, then you start learning how to use your fingers. I mean, it takes there's a path that you need to take.
Yes, and I think as disorganized as Freddie seemed, or as much as he didn't himself walk in a straight line ever, he was extremely clear about what he taught. And the reason I say that, students from one decade may understand a different Freddie than students from another decade was that he was constantly tweaking what he was doing and constantly trying to, he always used to tell me, oh man, I got this down. Now we're going to be able to streamline this, or whatever. And that's cool. That's as a good teacher should be.
Well, it should always be evolving. We're always learning. We don't stop learning just because we become teachers.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, man. So anyway, that sort of was my experience of Freddie. He was not an easy person to be around, and could be. He could be moody. He could be difficult. He could tear you apart. I think another thing about him that I learned about the old school is that, and people talk today about how students are kind of coddled in a way, like everybody, oh, that's wonderful, you're wonderful, here's a gold star, here's a bumper sticker, all that kind of stuff. And we're sort of in this thing where we don't want to, this idea of whiplash, oh, you're going to damage the student psychologically. But, I think in the day, especially you think the guys from the swing era came out of the Depression. I mean, a job meant, eating or not eating. I mean, it was serious business. And there was a lot more opportunities for working musicians. It was a much more common thing.
Yeah.
And I think there was this idea of a teacher, that it was like an apprenticeship. When you went to a teacher, you were learning a craft. It's like cabinet making. And if you went to a teacher, you shut up and you really learned what that teacher had to teach. And they were going to be hard on you because there was, a certain kind of a standard. And I think Freddie maintained that as a teacher, which I think, rubs people the wrong way sometimes. I was telling you on the way here, sometimes I would come into a lesson and he would, I worked my ass off on something, some very small thing. And within 2 minutes, he would go, no, you're not, no, go back and do it again, And when you're a student, how much work, you put in. And with Freddie, it was daunting because his students, here he was teaching these guys.
Well, if you don't get that, then you can't go to the next level because you need something to build on.
Exactly. And one of the things that I love about what I learned from Freddie, or how I teach it now, is that it is everything works with everything. There's nothing random.
Integration.
So yeah, like you said, you start with the tiny components you build, but as you build and you put that in this musical situation or that musical situation or these rudiments or those rudiments, it all works. And a grip is a grip is a grip. That's what I always say, because I never understand how, well, when I play jazz, I kind of hold the stick like this, but then when I play Latin, I kind of hold it like that. Why would you do that? Like, why would you have 10 different ways of holding the stick?
Your hand is not important. How you hold the stick is not important. It's what the stick is doing that's important.
Well, sure, absolutely. But, why not develop a system that'll work whether you're playing jazz or rock or funk or, that just works, right? So
Well, yeah, if it works, it should work for everything. Yeah,
exactly,
of course.
exactly. So, and then if we're talking about that we want to play with consistency and clarity and discover our own voice as musicians, then,
Well, that's a big issue today with all these cover tunes that are going around. And,
Yeah,
people
yeah.
just learning what other people have already done,
yeah.
which is good to do that. But you need to step out and find your own voice, like you say.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a place for that. I think imitation is a great way to get us down
Yeah, but
the
that
road.
a lot of people think that's the goal.
Right,
Yeah.
right, yeah, and that's certainly. I mean, at the end of the day, the goal is to play good music.
That's right. That's right.
And I think we as drummers get lost. And I'll make one more point, and then we'll get on to technical stuff. But the last point I want to make is something that you and I talked about, and again that I think we both agree on, which is that the sad and unfortunate and frustrating thing about us as drummers is that the way we're taught, okay, here's how you play this style, here's how you play that style. Okay, I'm going to learn 10 beats or 10 variations of this style. Say it's a bossa nova, right? Say it's a rock groove. And then when we get to playing in a musical situation with a band, the rest of the band is playing a song, and we're over here in our own little bubble playing rock groove number 5 and fill number 12 and or bossa nova. I use bossa nova because most drummers know one way to play a bossa nova.
Yeah.
They maybe have that in their back pocket. Well, say you're doing a night of bossa novas,
Mm-hmm.
and the next song is another medium tempo bossa nova. Well, all you've got is groove number 34 and fill number 5 from the book, and what are you going to do then? So what we end up doing as drummers is not playing music. We end up playing beats. We end up playing styles. And we don't-
Patterns.
Patterns.
Actually, yeah.
We don't think beyond that. And so, one of the things I try to get my students to do is to learn repertoire, learn songs, learn, if you're going to learn a style, learn 10 songs in the style and figure out how to sort of tap into your emotional moment at that moment. What you learned in lessons is tools in a toolbox, but those should only serve what you're feeling. And if you know a song, you can put feeling.
You shouldn't even be thinking about that.
Well, yeah. Those should just naturally be there in the wheelhouse to be accessed based upon the music's coming out of us.
Yeah, we decide what we want to play, and then we take our toolbox to execute it. But to use the toolbox as the source,
right? And I think that's a big problem, because when we learn, and I tell my students that there's a difference, and this is what I kind of got from Freddie too. There's a difference between being able to do something and making music.
Absolutely,
yes, I can get my limbs to do this, but when I get up on the bandstand, if this isn't in the muscle memory, there's no point in employing it, because we're not going to be able to employ it.
Well, also, you could play something perfectly and it won't swing.
Right, right.
I mean, some people never get the concept of what a pocket is, or what feels good.
And that was that was the kind of my subject on the last time I was here at Matt's thing, was sort of like starting with a quarter note and building everything off of that. And the quarter note. Just a quarter note, but
can you play just quarter notes and make it feel good?
Right.
Yeah, great.
Sure. Well, Matt, maybe are there any questions that anybody has?
Not yet.
Oh,
Not yet?
No questions? Come on, people.
Unless you know how to teach them how to work a computer. Everybody's in there. I'm getting a lot, because they messed up the system.
Ah.
But we got a lot of people in there. It's pretty cool.
Coffee real quick.
All right. Oop.
You guys are doing a nice job. They can hear you fine, see you fine, everything's working.
Good.
All right.
All right, but I would like to interact with.
So would I.
Yeah.
I'd like to have
All right. If anybody has any questions, feel free to fire away, because we'll just talk all day.
Yeah, we're going to run out of material, so please ask us something.
Okay, so I guess.
I have a question.
Yes.
What?
If you don't mind. Give us a little bit of background on how you began, who you studied with before Freddie Gruber, and how it changed
That's
you.
good. That's good. Let me ask the questions on the mic.
Oh, sure.
So how did you start playing drums, and who were you listening to, and who did you study with when you began? Who was your early influences?
Well, I should tell people that I kind of came late to the game as a serious professional drummer. I started very early, as a 7 or 8 years old, and I studied classically for 5 years before I ever even got a drum set. Now, this is not to say that I was a great student or that I took it seriously. I went to lessons. I was a kid, It I wasn't like from a very early age saying I'm going to be a professional drummer. I got my first drum set when I was 13. I started playing in bands. And what did I do? I stopped taking lessons and just played in bands. and then I went to college, and I went to Brandeis University in Boston. I got a degree in psychology, and I thought I was going to become a psychologist because that's what my dad does. And I was like, oh, I'll follow in the family business. Again, I wasn't thinking drums. That said, I never stopped playing drums. I was always in bands. I did it every marching band, concert band, jazz band. Shows, in school. I played all the school musicals, so I was very into drumming, but it was always a hobby. But my first real influence, I would say, is after I graduated from Brandeis University. I was in Boston, and I stayed in Boston, and I started studying with a guy named Bob Galati, who's not very well known, but he was the first real drummer, serious drummer that I studied with, and I studied with him for 5 months, and after that 5 months, I was so obsessed with drumming that it's never gone back.
I'd like to say that I think it was great that you studied psychology, because I think it was probably very very helpful in the way that you're such a good communicator. And I think that helped you tremendously.
Yeah, well, the other great thing about all the non-drumming training that I had was that I could write, and after many years of being a musician, I was sort of missing that intellectual side of things.
Yeah.
Because when you're a musician, musicians are really good at music. And the more professional they are, often the deeper they are at music.
I remember growing up, and everybody referred to that the drummers were stupid. I mean, they were ignorant, and they would hang out with musicians.
Well, yeah, but what I mean is they're really into music, but they're not necessarily into much of anything else because they're so focused on music per se. And at least with my band Royal Crown Review, after many years of just studying drums, thinking about music, playing music, I was missing that side. I guess that's my point.
Okay.
So that's when I started to get into the writing and historical aspect of things, I had some tools, and I now have been doing it for 15 years, really an active writer and creator of stuff. I've written hundreds of articles. I've written 5 books. I have 3 DVDs out.
Great.
Wow. I have a column in Drum Magazine called Moment in History, and we're up to the 38th column now.
Wow.
I mean, so I'm not, well, aren't I great? I'm just saying it's been nice to nurture that side of myself as well, and I'm grateful for the training I had.
I was a writer before I was a drummer. I was writing books, books, 100 pages. Whatever. But when I was in high school, I considered a writing career.
Wow, novels or what kind of books?
Fiction, basically. Yeah.
Cool. Very cool.
I wrote a space novel when I was like 15, and but that didn't last very long. Once I discovered drums, it just took over. But you're right. I mean, I did a lot of reading because I was interested in writing, and so I learned how to teach myself or be autodidactic, which was very helpful along the way.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's good as musicians for us to nurture other sides of ourselves.
Absolutely.
And to think about other issues in life other than music, as much as we are obsessed with music, undoubtedly. So just to finish the super quick answer to your question, studying with Bob Galati got me on the path to become a professional. But it was not until I got with Freddie, and I went to Dick Grove School of Music. I studied with Steve Houghton, Emil Richards, a lot of fantastic people. John Ferraro, who was Larry Carlton's drummer, and a lot of also great folks who don't have name, but were amazing teachers in LA. After that experience, I still felt like I had a little of this, a little of that, little of this, little of that. I was not feeling. That's why I went to Freddie, because what I was missing was the big picture, in somewhere inside. I couldn't articulate it, but I felt like I could do this and do that, but how does it all fit together? You know?
Why were you doing it? Yeah.
Yeah. And when I got with Freddie, I realized, holy crap, man, there is such a huge, big picture to think about, you know. And again, just to wrap another point, it really was something that we don't get access to the way the guys did back in the day. You know, back in the day, you had to get a sound. You had to be able to EQ yourself. If you were going to be a studio drummer, if you were going to record, you had to know how to play to the one mic and play to the space and interact with instruments that weren't mic'd. Instruments, you know, I talk a lot about guys in the 1930s. You know, say you're in a big band, 18-piece big band. Well, you got the huge bass drum, and you're playing in the Roseland Ballroom or the Palladium, which holds 6,000 people who are all singing, dancing, clinking glasses, scuffling their feet on the floor, laughing, yelling, you know, and roaring, cheering. So how are you going to get the 6,000th person in the back row to feel your beat all the way back there over all that noise, while at the same time not utterly obliterating the unmiked horns and the unamplified bass and guitar that are right next to you? And that's the magic trick that those guys had.
I call that playing the room. Yeah.
Playing the room, absolutely. But it's something that, because everything is all amplified and we tune our mixer today, we don't necessarily, we're not as keyed into that. But that's what I call the dark arts that Freddie brought to the fore. And what's really excited me is that since I've been studying with Freddie, there's other people now talking about this stuff, a lot of other people, which is terrific. You know, Jojo Mayer talks a lot about it. Steve Smith talks a lot about it. Dom Famularo, you know, is a great guy out here on the East Coast who is, you know, he's got his tree of influence. You've probably seen his chart, you know.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and then you guys, you know, I mean, so it's great that the discussion is being had. And things like Moeller is now, maybe there's a lot of misinformation about it or what exactly it is, but there's a lot of people who are, you know, really talking about it again, I think, whereas perhaps they weren't before.
Well, yeah, but there's too many experts.
Yes. I mean, so is there a question, Matt?
Yeah, this is from Gary from Australia. He wants to know, when you teach your students and things that you've learned, how do you incorporate what you have into a groove or a pattern?
That's a tough question.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, excuse me, to me, when I teach, it doesn't immediately get incorporated, right? If we're working on the components, maybe I'll talk about how it gets incorporated, but I incorporate slowly. And I think we had this discussion that...
Yeah, we did. I think the idea is that you don't try to incorporate it. It's not a matter of us consciously assimilating what we're practicing. It's a matter of subconsciously it entering our playing without our knowing it.
Yes, and I think the more you practice, the more it will just start to show up.
Right, and the more you try to use it, the more it'll get in your way.
Right, I agree. And I think everyone has this experience where, you know, you spend all day woodshedding something,
and then you want to do it. Yeah, then you want to do it.
Right. And invariably you fall on your face.
Absolutely.
You know, because it isn't really in there yet.
No, it has to go through your bloodstream first.
And I think there's also a lot of question about guys on pads. You know, I used to look at these old school teachers. You know, you studied with Mo Goldenberg, right?
Yeah.
At Juilliard. You know, and these guys would work on a pad, and and he said, "Well, I don't get it. I'm a drum set player. How is working on a pad going to make me a better drum set player?"
I had not an argument, but I had a very deep discussion with some classical percussionists who went to Juilliard and said, "Well, you know, Mo's old school. I mean, you know, now we use real drums, and you know."
But I think there is
no,
still.
But I use the pad, you know, 90-20, you know, almost exclusively. When you compare the amount of time I spend on a drum set, 90% of the time is on the pad.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's progressive, but a lot of stuff is on the pad at first, and it took me a long time to understand that actually, by getting clarity with everything that you're doing, how you set things up,
And
how
you can't
strike.
do that on a snare drum.
Yeah, I mean,
You know.
it presents a very clear understanding of movement, motion, getting a
And
sound.
you can also hear what you're doing better,
You can hear.
so you get better feedback.
Yes, and anyway, you know, and by the way, there is a sound to the pad. This is so interesting. I used to, Freddie had this kind of a setup, and I would say play a stroke or something like that, and then he would play a stroke, and the two would sound totally different. Mine would sound thin, and
Well,
you know,
I did a
and then he would
video.
hit the pad, and
Yeah.
it would sound like a drum that was this deep, and it's like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah,
So
I did a video about the
yeah.
fact that I tried to get the pad off the surface and give it an acoustic chamber underneath,
yeah.
and somebody commented on the video. I said, why are you worried about the sound of the pad? You know,
Well,
and no
if you-
clue at all what I was trying
if
to
you
do.
can get a sound out of the pad, imagine the sound you'll be able to get out of the
Plus
drum.
also the sound of the stick that you're hearing.
Yeah, and how you're housing the stick. You know, there's a sound chamber in here.
Yeah.
So if you hold the stick like this and strike like that
Yeah, you get a
versus this,
Yeah, and you're going
know.
to stop all the vibration of the stick
yeah,
too.
you get a different sound. So anyway, we've been yapping for almost an hour now.
Really?
Yeah, amazing.
Oh,
So
okay.
we should maybe move on
All right.
a little bit. Is
Sure.
that cool?
Sure. I'm having a good time
Yeah,
doing what
no,
we're doing.
Me too,
you know.
me too. Hopefully, I just want to make sure. I think people want to see technical stuff.
Okay.
And are people complaining? Oh, okay.
No.
All right, good. Any other questions?
When did they start?
When are they going to start? Yeah.
The gentleman from Florida, Mike, he wants to thank both of you for taking your time out and, you know, showing your feelings or your knowledge or whatever. So.
Thank you, Mike, and
Yeah.
you know, it's something that we love to do. So.
Yeah. Cool. All right.
All right,
So, Freddie taught all three grips: French, German, traditional. And I think the reason for that is that, you know, we don't study grip just to learn grip, but when you go to different parts of the kit, it may be more advantageous based on how you move to go from one grip to another. So, which is certainly the case. Most people, for example, play the ride cymbal. And again, world, I'm a lefty, so I'm going to be mirror image for most drummers. So, you know, yes, I play backwards, left. So just imagine I'm in the mirror, okay? So my ride cymbal is over here. So, you know, when you go from one surface to another, bam, here you could be German, here you could be French. And it's about moving from place to place. So that's why it makes sense to utilize all three.
Well, basically, what I see all the great players do is they're in French when they're riding, and they go to overhand when they're playing the rest of the drums.
Exactly.
Because it facilitates what they're doing.
Exactly. And I actually had never really worked on my opposite traditional grip. When I was in high school, you know, I played like this in marching band like everybody else. So what was really neat with Freddie was that, you know, he had to unlock some bad habits, especially with my German. With my, you know, I did this a lot, tweaking the wrist out like that, and you know, all kinds of other terrible
that's gonna hurt
things.
after a while.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But with traditional, I was a blank slate on this side, and he could really just start from scratch. with
Much
me.
easier when
Yeah.
you're a blank slate.
And that was cool. So okay, so all three grips, and essentially the components that Freddie started with and that I teach, which I think is very effective, are taps and strokes. So a tap is defined as the stick simply falling onto the head and falling over a balance point. So a place on the stick, and
This is French now.
this is
Yeah.
French, yes. So, and we start kind of with a neutral position, which is what is my terminology for explaining it, where we're balanced and we can let the stick fall over this fulcrum, bring it back, and we have something over here to guide us, bring it back to, so that we always come back to the same place every time, okay? So the idea of an exercise like this is that and again, this may seem really weird and alien to a lot of people. It may seem like, what does this have to do with drumming? That's what I mean by a component, okay? So it's very similar.
The stroke is the main foundational component of everything.
Yes. So anyway, it's like the Karate Kid, right? The kid goes to the master and he wants to learn karate, and the master says, "Awesome, go paint my fence. Go wax my car." And the kid's like, "What? You just gonna put me up to slave labor? I don't get it." But what he's doing is he's teaching him the motions that will eventually become karate. So in essence, this is what I tell my students. This part of the process is the wax on, wax off. Don't even worry about drumming right now. What we're doing is establishing a framework that we're going to build from, okay?
Yeah.
So in this case, taps. So in the French grip, you know, we establish a fulcrum here. The moving part, there's a thing called a release. That is the only thing that moves. In this case, it's the thumb. So we allow the stick to fall forward over the fulcrum, and just by letting the weight of the stick pull us down. Now, in a discussion of fulcrum, you can move the stick around and explore. So if we come way back here, well, sure, the stick easily falls forward, but man, we got to work hard to get it back
it doesn't
up,
come
right?
back.
If we're too far up, the stick either doesn't fall forward or it doesn't really have oomph. So we want to find the spot on the stick where the stick will naturally fall forward, and then simply by moving our thumb, we can bring it back up, okay? Now the equivalent in the German grip, at least as I've learned it, is that we hold the stick here between these two fingers, and the stick is the fulcrum spot, its stick sits here. So we could just simply get that thing going. So this is the point where the stick simply balances through, okay? Now, just hear me out. Yeah.
That's
Same thing?
exactly what I
Okay,
do.
good. I was afraid if we were
Oh, no, no,
disagreeing
no, no,
here,
no,
then-
no, no. We're in
Okay.
total
All right,
agreement
cool.
so far.
So then, in terms of playing a tap, the way I talk about it is, again, we set up here, and the idea is just simply to let the stick fall from the wrist. We don't change the grip at all. We let the stick fall onto the head, okay? Like so. And we figure out where and how we're lifting from here. And all we're doing is simply getting into this idea of letting the stick fall, getting out of the way and just letting it fall. And I actually work my students into an exercise where they simultaneously are lifting and dropping the stick.
That's the Henry Adler thing, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
Freddie picked
yeah.
up stuff from a lot of different
Yeah,
places. and
Henry
incorporated it, so-
was teaching that. Yeah.
yeah. So, but the idea that's so interesting is our inclination to want to throw down the stick. Students struggle with this because they can't allow this. I say this is about the lift, 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 and don't worry about the hand. Let it fall.
It's funny because I asked Joe what he got from Billy Gladstone.
Uh-huh.
Because I thought it was going to be, oh, he showed me the finger thing. That's not what he said. What he said was, he said everything was an upstroke.
Yes.
You're pulling it out of the drum.
Yes, and people often ask, how do I pull? What do you mean pulling the sound out of the cymbal? Pulling the sound out of the drum? That's crap. You know, we strike it, we go down.
Yeah, right.
But in reality,
We're-
if you know how to set it up, the down is easy, and we just simply allow the down to happen. Okay. Now, again, suspend reality, folks. Just hear me out for a few more minutes. I'm trying to sort of develop the picture here. So, okay, in traditional, it's a little more complicated. There are more components to the traditional, right? Again, the benefit of traditional, I should say, and people say, well, how should I play? Matched or traditional? And my answer to that question is yes, right? Heel up or heel down? My answer to that question is yes. It's all about the more knowledge you have, the more different tools you have in the box, you can apply them toward whatever music it is that you are doing.
I don't even want to answer those questions.
Right.
It's up to you. I don't care.
Right.
I don't care what you do,
But,
really.
but the idea is that that's a good reason to learn traditional, even if traditional is not just for jazz players, right?
No.
There's a lot of.
I played rock and roll in traditional.
Absolutely,
you know.
and you look at Vinny and JoJo and
Yeah.
Weckl. I mean, they're all traditional players.
Yeah.
Todd Zuckerman's great,
Sure.
traditional guy. Anyway, so the idea here is that the fulcrum basically is here, okay, but the grip is here, okay. This is an active ingredient. This is a lever in the same way that this is a lever, in the same way that this, in this case, is a lever, okay. But there are other moving parts. So we have this, of course, is a lever, this rotational motion of turning a doorknob. And a lot of people think traditional, which you were talking about this, is an up and down thing.
Right.
It's nothing to do with up and down. It's about turning. And the idea, of course, was the marching guys, their drums were slanted so they could walk with them. So that's why this grip was developed, so that it wasn't awkward for a drummer to have to play a tilted drum, which most people know, but I figure let's explain that.
Yeah.
So there's many components here that I set up, but the idea is with a tap, again, we start in the same kind of neutral position. We let the stick fall, and it falls over the fulcrum. So first we have to do exercise to identify the fulcrum. Again, if we move it this way,
Yeah.
it's hard to lift.
mhm.
If we come back too far, well, it's not going to fall forward. So there's a natural point. And I think one of the things, if you look at both Steve Smith and Dave Weckl, and I don't, proclaim to have intimate knowledge, but both of those guys played like this.
That's right.
When they started.
Early in
earlier,
their career.
And post Freddie, this.
That's
and
right.
I used to look at
That's right.
videos of the old school jazz guys, and to me there was so much butt end coming out. It looked like they were playing like that to
Yeah,
me. You know,
yeah.
how the hell what is that? I don't get it. When I got with Freddie,
How do
that's
you
that
get power
ancient-
that way? Right.
That ancient technology of, okay, we can access this spot on the stick, this fulcrum spot, just like we can access it here, just like we can
Well, the
access
first thing you need to
here.
understand is, well, I call it the balance point.
Yes.
That if you need to understand what that is before you even begin.
Yes. Now, again, it's like the guy's question before. You know, I have students that as soon as they learn this, they try to play this while they're playing. That's not the point. We're not even close to that yet. We're just trying to understand some basics, very basic things that we're going to then develop from. I think people, you said this, and you know, that a lot of times students are looking for a magic trick. They think, oh, if I study with Freddie Gruber, that he's got some super tricky
Some
thing
magic knowledge.
that's going to turn me into, you know, Buddy Rich overnight.
Right.
And the sad reality of that, which isn't sad at all, but the reality of that is that there is no easy way to get to greatness.
No, it isn't.
Greatness is about hard effing work and an understanding.
Effing meaning focused.
Yes, yes, right. Exactly. So, just to continue, and we'll keep throwing in little nuggets of wisdom as we go.
Okay.
So, in any case, a tap in the traditional grip is that we're simply going to allow the stick to fall over the fulcrum and basically land on the fulcrum. Now, what I want you to notice is whether I'm doing it in the German grip, or I'm doing it in traditional grip, or I'm doing it in French grip, what always happens at the end of a tap is a little bobble, okay? And what that means is we're truly giving up control of the stick and simply allowing it to fall. This is an enormous lesson that people have a hard time with. It takes a while to get over the idea of wanting to put the stick down. If we put the stick down, no bobble, right? Because we are consciously putting it down.
Well, you got tension there,
Yeah.
which is not only preventing the bobble, but it's also preventing any vibration,
Yes.
which kills the sound as well.
Exactly. So now we move on to strokes, and essentially learning taps and strokes with, when I teach them, the way I teach them, how I sort of took Freddie's thing and apply it in my own sensibility, is those are the fundamentals, those are the building blocks, those are the letters upon which the words and the phrases and the paragraphs are built. So our rudiments, right? If rudiments, you know, are our vocabulary that we then apply to what we do on a drum set or what we do on a snare drum, we have to first learn how to develop the rudiments based in taps and strokes, okay? So now, once we've sort of developed the idea of a tap, now we can turn that into a stroke, because stroke involves more of a setup. So a stroke in the French grip, and again we're here, is we release, but as we release we come up and we throw.
So you're using this lever now.
Yes, you're using that lever now, but you're still applying this idea of the thumb.
Well, it's
As
an
you
integration.
come down and throw it, you're now throwing the thumb, okay? Now this might seem like when my students start with this, it's a very awkward motion for them. But the idea is, watch what happens at the end, okay? Watch what happens. The stick flies back.
That's like a
It's
motor. That's
called
like a motor thing.
rebound.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like a motor on every stroke.
It is. So every stroke is about getting rebound. It's about the end result, okay? To me, like the important thing, I call it the pop. What you focus on at the end is the pop, okay? Now, you have to get, like you said, these two, what do you call them? Levers? Levers, yeah,
Or
fantastic.
fulcrums. They're both fulcrums.
Exactly. And getting them to work together, right? And I liken this process to driving a stick shift car, okay? Because you got two pedals. And if you don't apply enough gas, or if you let up the clutch too fast, you stall out. So getting those things to work together is the key. And it ain't easy, you know?
That's the integration that I talk about.
Integration, exactly, okay? So let me just go what a stroke is in the other grip. Now, in the German grip, in addition to this, we have this wrist release, right? Now, if we release this and we bring the arm in and then throw from here, it's the same idea. And again, we have a pop, okay?
I call that a forearm stroke.
A forearm
as
stroke.
opposed to a whip stroke.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in my lingo, this is just a basic stroke.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's the same.
A forearm stroke.
It's the same stuff.
Perfect.
It's just we have a different
now,
vocabulary.
Let's do something else. Okay. What's with the arm motion, Daniel? Right. And here also kind of an arm motion. So this is something that I've kind of developed with my students. That's helpful. if we put our hands like so on the pad, and then we simply turn them inward as much as we can and keep turning them until we're sort of here, and then unwind, this is an axis that the arm moves very naturally on, right? The arm basically will do this. It doesn't matter how far you can get your hands in, but this, you see how everything is integrated, how the hand,
And,
the arm,
and look what the elbow does.
Exactly, and the turn starts, the rotation starts from all the way back
Well,
here.
this is
all
another
of
this is another
is-
fulcrum.
Right. All of this is turning, okay? So now, when we apply some of these things, that's what this concept is based on, is this idea of, actually, I'm just doing this, but I've turned my hand out. I've released from here, and we throw, okay? Now, why all of this craziness? Well, if I turn to the side and you look at the stick, this is the idea of making your life as easy as possible, okay? In other words, if you can see me from the side view now, when I release and come up, and it's easy to demonstrate in French grip, when I come up and I strike, notice how little I'm moving and how little the stick is moving, yet look at the power I'm able to get. Look how much the stick flies back to me, okay? So this is the economy of motion. In this one simple exercise, I'm trying to just show people why it's effective, right? Release, throw. Notice I'm doing next to nothing. I'm not putting a whole lot of effort into it, but the result I get is big. And
It's popping.
it's popping. And that's the key. That's the key. Now, there's a lot of other things that go into this, one of which is, how do you approach the drum? So again, people think drumming is about kind of up and down.
Up and down, right?
But here, I like to say, think about being the boxer. When a boxer throws a jab, bam.
Well, I studied boxing. When a boxer throws a jab, he's turning his fist at the same time.
Right.
This is the jab in boxing.
Right.
You know, people think it's straight out, but it's not.
Yeah.
There's a rotation that's happening.
Yeah, and a jab, a punch from a boxer doesn't just, you're not just putting your arm out, your whole body is involved.
It goes from the floor.
From the floor, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But the idea here is that we want to go at the drum. To get maximum pop, we got to think about going at the drum, okay? So again, it's a bit of a leap of faith, because probably people are out there are like, this guy's insane, or what the hell is he talking about? What does this have to do with drumming, right? And when I went to Freddie, I sort of said the same thing. Like, what these exercises seem to be from left field. As Freddie would say, funguli land, which if you understand Italian, you know what that means. But
I come from Brooklyn.
yeah. So, but there is an absolute method to the madness. There's a lot of thought that goes into this. Okay. Now in German grip, same idea. We set it up again. Watch the stick. The stick doesn't come up very high. I don't need to go like this. That's wasted motion. Here, boom. So you can get with this little wind up with these two, lever number 1, lever number 2, lever number 3, tons of power. And look at the stick.
Lever number 4.
Lever number 4, yes. The stick doesn't have to move a lot to get power. We don't have to come from here to get power, okay?
Right.
Now, traditional, I'll talk about the stroke. The stroke in traditional has a lot of moving parts, and it's not something I can just explain in 5 seconds or less. But the idea is, again, instead of having a release like you have here that sets it up, or a release here that sets it up, we open the hand around the stick and we create an arc and come straight down. And the idea is, behind all this, is to get your pop. It's almost like you're just... And you can almost let the arm fall. No effort at all. But it's in the setup where everything happens. But yet, look at that pop that we're getting. Open the hand, close the hand. And like I say, I do, before we even get to strokes or taps, I have 3 different exercises I teach, warm-up exercises, that work on the different aspects of the traditional grip. As I learned from Freddie, and again, other people may have different ideas, this is as I learned from Freddie, and I think it's a pretty good source considering who we hung out with and who his students were, both in the past and the present, So the idea is to get this thumb, think of it as one long, not here, but like this, and we're just going to get that stick to pop and create a pulse, just simply by not moving anything other than the thumb, right? So that's one thing that's got to be worked on. A lot of students have an awful hard time because again they're focused on down, and they
And
don't
they're
know how to
also
get out of the way.
they're also
They
squeezing
squeeze
it,
the
yeah.
crap out of it. It's like a trigger. Bam, that's the motion. Bam, get in and then let the stick do what it's going to do and follow it. It's like bouncing a basketball.
That's right.
When we bounce a basketball, the ball doesn't come up and then we stop it and then pick it up and start over again. That's utterly pointless.
I talk about that too.
Yeah.
When you look at a basketball player, they're following the ball all the way down, and then they're trying to get them. They have to let go because that's the rules.
Right.
You know, we have an advantage. We don't have to let go.
Right. That's
You
true.
know? So, and they're also following it all the
that's
way back up
And
as
we
well.
wait. The idea is with something like this, and I call this the throw up exercise, which is kind of the thing I did in the last time I was here with Matt. And I just showed the French grip, which is that we throw and then we get out of the way. There's a throw and then there's an up. And the up, we simply just we let physics happen. We allow the stick so that each stroke starts and ends here. Boom. Right? And I talk about this historically, how the idea of the quarter note and why a quarter note swings is because of throw and up. In other words, as drummers, we need to allow the full value of the quarter note to happen in order to give it that American music feel, that jazz feel. If we're playing eighth notes, if we're playing sixteenths instead of quarters, you know, if I'm 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm not allowing a full quarter to happen. I'm not giving credence to my history. And again, it's...
Excuse me a second. Keep
Oh,
going.
no problem. I should point out Alan's dog. He brought his dog Lucky here. Very adorable pooch. You want to show Lucky to the camera for a sec? There he is. Hey, boy. So we got...
We don't have you on the camera.
No,
There you go.
yeah. He's rocking. But he's wanting a little attention right now.
Give him a pair of drums.
Anyway, I know that this is probably overwhelming and probably confusing, but I'm trying to show big picture and going from small to big. And this is why a lot of my students, it takes time. It took a lot of time with Freddie before I understood, you know, and most of his students underwent this sort of
Transformation.
awakening, thinking about things very differently. And believe me, Freddie did not explain this stuff as clearly as I'm hopefully explaining it now.
I'm sure,
He didn't
yeah.
tell me, you know, the reason for doing things. It was do them, and then he would talk philosophically, you know. Yes, there's a question.
Why do you use the term throw up as opposed to upstroke?
Because to me,
Well, that was the question.
oh, I'm sorry. Matt is asking, why do I use the term throw up instead of upstroke? And I think the idea, the reason I have come up with that term, it's a very silly term, right? Throw up, you know.
It sounds
Disgusting,
yeah.
and it makes people laugh. But also, there are two separate components to it. In order, this might be getting a little far afield, but this is what I talked about at my last session. That all of our American music, whether it's rock, which emerged out of jazz,
That's right.
you know, or jazz itself. Jazz originally was dance music. You had to make people dance, and you had to do that by driving your quarter note pulse. So if we go back to the Count Basie rhythm section, you know, that was the time in the 30s when the quarter note pulse became the primary pulse that was used in dance music. Why? Because it was great to dance to, as opposed to the two feel.
And the bass drum was the lead part of the instrument also.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I mean, that was super important. So the quarter note pulse had to have two elements. Number one, it had to have drive. You had to throw. But if you would just play your quarter notes like or you know, it wasn't going to have that thing about what makes it swing. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing.
That's right.
And the swing is what comes from allowing the quarter note to play it as a full note, to, with your motion, establish the full...
Well, this is an issue with drummers, as
Yeah.
opposed to trumpet players, is
Right.
that they don't understand the values of the note.
Yes. In other words, and I get with my students, it takes sometimes my students of working on taps and strokes and things with me a long time to get to the jazz
Yeah.
ride
They
pattern.
think everything is a staccato
Everything
16th
is
note
staccato.
with
When
a dotted
when
eighth
you-
accent when it's
Yes.
not.
When you play the Ted Reed book, okay,
Right.
and maybe we could,
All right.
show
Yes,
one
yes, yes.
example.
Do we have the Ted Reed book? Yeah. You mean the page where he shows you 3 different notations?
Yes.
Yeah, oh
Yeah.
man,
I mean,
that's classic.
Those are my pages, you know. And of course, Alan Dawson taught a lot. That's a whole Berkeley kind of a stream.
Yeah.
Bob Galati, who was an Alan Dawson Berkeley product.
And it translates into what you're going to choose to hit on the
Yes.
drum,
Yes.
you
yes.
know, as well.
We're getting a little far afield, I suppose.
There
but-
is a
but-
question too, a couple questions.
Okay, all right.
No, we
So
have to do this.
Let's go to page
Yeah, please.
33. How can we? Should I just hold this up to the camera?
I'll hold it up.
Okay.
And you talk about it.
Okay. So if you take that very first exercise, I'll run you around.
Yeah. You can just untie me.
Here, one of you is caught. We're all rigged up to microphones here. So
Yeah.
Sorry. So if you hold up 33, and you see column A, B, and C at the top of the page. I suppose I can walk up there with you.
Come back a little, there you go.
So each of these, here's column A, B, and C, right? And each of these expresses the same sequence, but written in 3 different ways.
And they sound 3 different ways.
And they sound 3 different ways. If you are a trumpet player, you're going to play these in 3 different ways than a drummer would play them. Okay. Now let's even go back to syncopation. What that means. For years, I had no idea what syncopation actually means, and asked my students, and almost none of them actually really know what it means. Why do we have a book called Syncopation, and what the hell does that have to do with playing jazz? So the term syncopation is the idea of, and this is what I learned from Freddie. You know, he used to say, if there's the German, if we approach this with the German way, zup, da da dup, da da dup, da da dup, everything is on the downbeat, right? The strong beats. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1. And you would play that, say the very first exercise. Let's go to page 34 now. And a lot of people study out of this book, so this is kind of a classic.
I did. This is one of the first books,
Yeah.
you know.
So if we go the other side. So this very first exercise right here, okay? 1 and 2 and 3, 4. But look, that exercise is made up of long notes and short notes. The
Right.
eighth notes are short notes. The long notes are long. The quarter notes are long. So if I'm a trumpet player, I'm going to play this as dee da, dee da, da.
That's right,
Or
right.
if we swing it, dee da, dee da, da, dee da, dee da, da. But if I'm a drummer and I'm not playing this in a syncopated way, I'm going to play it
Da 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 da.
Yeah, and even worse, putting the emphasis on the downbeats.
Da 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 da.
And that is not swinging, okay?
No.
Because it's about phrasing and understanding. So just to go back now to this idea of throw up exercise, and Matt asked me why do you say the throw and the up? You need both. In other words, if we were to draw our spangling pattern out, I can write it out. It is composed of long notes and short notes as well. So long, long, short, long, long, short, long, long, short, long. In fact, Matt, do you have a pen and paper? I can just draw that out for people. And we are getting far afield from what I started out doing, but I had a feeling this was going to happen. So.
Well, we need a couple more hours. I
Yeah,
think.
well,
Take whatever you need.
Okay,
I need a
cool.
cigarette.
Do you have a pen? That's great. Thank you. Big hand for Matt Patella, by the way, the great facilitator.
Yeah.
He is happening. So let me just do a very brief, and all my students are probably rolling their eyes going, yeah, Dan, we know all this already. This is not for my students. This is for people.
There you
Try to
go.
explain
Yeah,
about
there you
Freddie.
go.
Okay. So let's take this up to the camera again.
Okay. I'll hold it and you can talk to it.
Okay. So what we have is, to your left a little more, and back a little more. Yeah, so here we go. So quarter note, the value of this is an eighth note triplet and a second eighth note triplet, so essentially another long note. Here is now a short note. So it sounds like ta, 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 ta. If I was a trumpet player, that's how I would play this. Most drummers play this ta, 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 right? And
Also,
therefore,
you're emphasizing those quarters so they stand out.
right. So this is an example of the throw up exercise, and the value of it is when you get to the full spangling pattern, as it were, long, long, short, long, long, short, long, long, short, long, ta, 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 ta. Again, this is very idealized and not, I'm not necessarily going to have my setup exactly like this when I'm playing my cymbal pattern, but the idea is you can hear the longs and the shorts after a while.
Also notice that there's a difference in the heights between the longs and the shorts.
Right.
There's
Exactly.
different amounts of space to travel
But
through.
if you look at the longs, ta 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 ta, and we could just play quarter notes.
You're in the same place, in the same distance, in the same
Right.
space,
And-
and the short notes have a much smaller space.
Yes, and you hear, yes, space.
Space.
So here was one of Freddie's things he used to say to me all the time: space equals time. And I was like, what the hell is he talking
Didn't
about?
you ever read Einstein?
Well, right. But it's very simple, actually, because if, say, I play down here and I create this much space every time, that's going to be different than if I create this much space every time.
That's right.
So the space through which we move directly is directly
related to the-
relational to the time, and as drummers, the time, our time as drummers, So it's
Well, in physics, totally. I mean, time and space are totally connected. They're not different elements of time. We used to think of it, the world was three-dimensional, but it's really four-dimensional, and the fourth dimension is time. That's straight physics.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I dig. And because we are timekeepers, how we move, that's important. So what I've essentially shown is taps and strokes in 3 different grips. And the idea in setting up the taps and strokes is to remove ourselves from the equation, and as much as possible to get ourselves off the stick.
Or get out of the way.
To get out of the way and just allow the stick to fall on the head. And now when I want to strike, I set it up so that the stick does what it's supposed to do, and I move in a minimal way.
So your stroke is up here and your taps are down here?
Exactly, exactly. So, and that's part of the idea. So now say you want to create, so now we move to say, well, first then, the next step is to take the idea of a tap and a stroke and combine them and create eighth notes, okay? So stroke, now on the way up, we grab the tap as we're creating the next stroke. So now we create eighth notes, okay? Now, as we get faster with this,
this is
molar. This is molar. This is molar. This is how Freddie gets to molar. Okay, now what's cool about this is, once we get this down, notice again my stick height, whether I'm coming up or down, the stick is now coming to the same height. If you listen, what you're going to hear, what you want to hear is that.
Right.
Essentially, right? But now I'm economizing my motion. I'm making one motion, the molar motion, and getting 2 for the price of 1. And then, of course, you can take it here, 3 for the price of 1. Again, look, at the stick, the idea is the stick always comes back to the same place, so that space equals time. If I'm allowing my stick to essentially do this, right, through one motion, what my ear is going to hear is consistency.
I think what most people do with the molar is they stay down on the,
It depends on your tempo.
Yeah.
If you're going to play molar here, and you want nice full strokes, if you're going to play molar here,
you have to compensate for the space.
Compensate the space and
because
the time.
Because of the time.
Right.
It requires smaller space.
Right. Okay. So now we can add. So.
Yep.
Sorry. Oh, there's a question. Sorry.
Yeah, well, you guys are really into this.
There's probably a lot of confusion right now.
No, there's no confusion.
Okay.
They want to know, when you're playing your swing on a ride cymbal, are you doing an oval, or are you straight up and down, or how are you?
Good question.
Very good question.
What's the direction you're using? Is it straight up and down, or is there a circular pattern that you're getting involved in?
So this is another interesting, discussion, and a lot of people have a lot of ideas about this. And again, I'll show you what I learned from Freddie and how I've integrated it.
Okay.
So Freddie was always about 3 dimensions. He was always about things being circular, and sometimes this was physical circular, and sometimes this was conceptual circular. In other words, the way I like to think about this throw-up exercise, simple quarter notes, is a circle. In other words, the stick goes through a motion, a down, it strikes, and then the up is on the way up, and it's like a wheel, so that each time you strike, as you come up and you come to the end of the wheel, you're now ready to create the next one. So it's fluid. In other words, the motion is fluid. We don't ever stop. A lot of times my students do this, and they do that.
I call it continuous motion.
Continuous motion. Fabulous. Yep. Exactly. Same idea exactly. And so now we're just a wheel cruising down the road. And if we can, my whole concept is that if we can get this, and we can lock the other limbs into the consistency of this. That's why throw up quarter notes to me is so important, at the heart of so much. And again, I can't explain it all right now. I'm trying to, but
how do you explain a lifetime in an hour?
How do you explain a lifetime in an hour? Exactly. Yeah. Very good. So, but But the idea is we can then lock the other limbs into this, and we have integration, like what you're saying, so that there's this concept of independence, which we all understand, which is getting this limb to do this against that limb doing that. But what we forget about is interdependence, right? Which is that all the limbs have to work together in order.
Oh yeah, your bass drum has to be in time with your hi-hat, which has to be in time with your ride cymbal.
But even more than that, the difference between a good drummer and a great drummer is that the great drummer, what you're hearing is one organic entity, right? And you're not hearing the parts.
You're
know
playing
what I'm
the whole instrument as one,
instrument,
right?
Exactly. And when you hear it come together, I just had a student yesterday, this guy from Philly, who I've been working with for a couple of years, and it's amazing because what we're doing is simple, but yet what he's achieving now as an integrated force on the kit, it's that thing. I could just see it happening, and I couldn't hear or see these things before. Freddie would look at me and he would see things I wouldn't see, but I could see it now.
No, you weren't looking for them.
Right, I wasn't looking for them. So, but when you see that integration come together, and all of a sudden it's what I call the golden groove. It's like it's all wound up in one thing, and that one thing is expressing itself. It's moving down the road, as opposed to hearing limbs and a brain thinking
Well, that's
about
the
those
problem
limbs.
with pattern playing, is that you're trying to play patterns and see where they match and where they don't match, so you get the independence thing to go. But you can't think of it that way. It's just you have to hear the whole thing, and the whole thing happens.
That has to be in service,
of
something greater.
Yes, that's right.
And that's when you hear a great drummer, that's the magic trick.
And that's when the pocket happens.
Yes. So,
Another question?
another question. Okay,
boom.
great.
About Freddie.
Yes,
All right, you guys are going off.
we're going off.
Anyway, the question is, when you were studying with Freddie, did he teach you out of any particular books?
All right, what were the books that Freddie used?
Matt, can I send you on a short errand over there to grab some of the books? I brought some.
Oh, you brought them. Great. Oh,
Yeah,
man.
I even have some of Freddie's own notes in them and stuff.
In his own hand?
Oh, yes.
Oh, I
and
love that.
Anybody who was a
Oh.
Freddie student,
Oh,
he
man.
has I like to say, I actually have scanned some of these and send them to my students. And
Mm-hmm.
again, if I was to send this to you, you would have no fucking idea. Excuse me.
Whoops.
You would have no idea. You would have no idea what to do with it.
I took
at
my
all.
original notebook with Joe, and I posted
Yeah.
them
Oh,
on.
man.
I posted them on
Yeah.
Facebook.
And it's cool. I mean, but at the end of the day, the idea was, and this is why it was so difficult for Freddie to try to document this stuff in a video. It isn't patterns. It isn't sticking techniques or paradiddles. It is concepts. It's a philosophy. It's an awareness. And I hope that people out there kind of see that in the way that we're talking. I think you and I talk the same language in the way we think about this, because we've done a lot.
Well, we
of
have a
thinking
different
and we've done a lot of
vocabulary, but
studying.
yeah.
Well, yeah, but it's the same idea. And like we said yesterday, there's only one way physics works.
Yes.
Gravity pushes down at 32.
Yeah, science is
whatever,
science, and it reacts the same
pounds per
way.
square inch,
Yeah,
yeah.
whatever it is you're doing.
Balance point, the stick is only going to balance one way.
In one place.
In one place on the stick, right? This balance point right here. So it's about harnessing that toward a bigger end. And I think that we seem to keep coming back to this, that it isn't, getting this leg to do this against this arm. That's only step one. That isn't the big picture.
That's just the choreography.
Yeah. But even then, the choreography, the motion has to be studied as well. So the books that I started with Freddie, Syncopation for sure. This one is a real important one. I would like to.
I don't think I've ever seen that one.
Maybe you've seen a different cover. This
Okay.
is the Buddy Rich Henry Adler.
Oh, that's the
book.
Adler book.
But
Okay, yeah, that's a
Buddy
newer
Rich Henry
version.
Adler's
Yeah,
book.
that's a
it's
newer
newer
version.
version. Could you grab the Syncopation book real quick? I want to show people something.
Here,
I discovered this in looking about these two covers, and I want people to take a look first of all at this cover. Now, when I was a kid, I looked at this book and laughed. Right? I thought nobody plays the drums like that. That is like ridiculous. The guy is posing, and what a silly pose that is. How wrong I was, okay? The more I learn from Freddie and learn about these old school guys, the more I'm in admiration of this guy's form, Ted Reed, of his form. And by the way, this beautiful drum is, I believe this is a Billy Gladstone drum that Ted Reed either was given by Billy Gladstone, or it might even be Billy Gladstone's drum. I don't know. Somebody will write in and correct me, I'm sure. And the stand is beautiful. The stand that the drum is on, you can see, is a beautiful orchestral stand. I've never seen one of these in the flesh, but something to do with this is either Billy Gladstone's drum or stand that Ted Reed had and used. So what I first want people to see is the technique of the German grip in Ted Reed's right hand. It's a beautiful picture-perfect German grip in the sense that we talked about the fulcrum being the middle finger under the stick. Notice, I'll put this close, hopefully it still is in focus. The only finger that is all the way wrapped around the stick is the middle finger here on this thing. Secondly, notice that his right arm is out away from his body. That is the expression of this idea of movement here, that when you come down, the elbow moves away from the body, okay? And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a second. And now, let's flip here. Buddy Rich, probably in the 60s or the 70s. Notice his right arm away from his body, okay? This is not coincidence, people. This is exactly what Alan and I are talking about in terms of the setup, this axis that the arm moves along as we go from place to place, okay? Now, how we practice this is what I call this neutral position. Freddie called it the praying position. When you would start at these things, it's as if your hands are in prayer. So whether you're in French grip, which is a setup here, and what did you call this again? I love how you called this. The
balance point?
Balance point, yeah. Balance point. The balance point, when we set up, notice our arms are not here like this, they're like this. Because this is where an arm would naturally go if we put it down like so. Doesn't mean the arm is away from the body, we just are unwinding. It's an unwinding, right? It's that motion, that rotational axis, as it were. So that same idea, if we're working on German grip, same concept is there. In other words, the arm is out away from the body. Now, this is part of this idea of moving from surface to surface. So when I started with Freddie moving around the drums, oh, and I don't have that book. There's another book that we use. He asked about what books. So certainly these two books, big time. But then Joe Cusatis.
Oh, I know Joe, yeah.
And his book, Rhythmic Patterns. And Freddie used that book. And again, Freddie didn't...
Joe was the drummer with Peter Nero?
Peter Nero.
Yeah.
And I put up a fabulous, there's an incredible clip. You've got Rhythmic Patterns, great.
Great.
Rudimental
Patterns.
Slightly
No.
different book. The Rhythmic Patterns is a brown.
Yeah, and Joe wrote a book about crossovers and getting around the drum set. I mean, he was unbelievable.
That's what Rhythmic Patterns is. I put up a clip of Joe Cusatis, one of the most underrated drummers. And
there's a great solo he did he ran his own drum solo.
He ran his own drum shop, and apparently he's alive. He's
he retired.
Somewhere.
Yeah, he retired.
And somebody wrote to me after I put that clip up and said, "Would you get in touch with him?" And I need to. Well, that's a big one.
Yeah,
yes.
John Redsecker is a student of his.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, the idea though is Freddie used rhythmic patterns, and we move from surface to surface, first from tom to tom. So the idea now is once we've got strokes down, and we've got taps and stroke combinations, and we've got this idealized neutral position, now we can release as if we're going into stroke, and we're going to turn over and drop into French grip, and now we're over here. So this whole thing is working and moving, getting us from place to place. Release points. What did you call these different things? Release points?
Well, they're levers or fulcrums or axis points of rotation.
Axis points of rotation. It's all the same thing.
It's all the same thing.
It's all the same thing. So moving from here to here. Now we're here. We want to get back. We release from here. French grip. See that? We release here. Come here. Turn over. We make an arc. And again, if we do the work on the way up, I don't have to do
Most
anything.
rock drummers, they're doing this.
Right, as opposed to this, which is totally inefficient.
Yeah.
And
doesn't,
I would say
it doesn't
forget
swing.
most rock drummers, most drummers, right?
Okay, I'm sorry.
But
I didn't mean to be prejudiced.
I don't want to alienate rock drummers because there's a lot of rock drummers with great technique.
I was a rock drummer from the early.
You made your living as a rock drummer.
Yeah.
At the highest levels, man.
Yeah.
So anyway, just and if you set up, again, we talk about the setup. If we set it up and then let it drop, well, how easy is that? And, this is something I tell my students all the time, that we are so focused on this, you can always turn the volume up In other words, if you can set this up beautifully and just let this fall, again, you've got gravity, balance working on your side. And if you know how to strike the drum and how you're holding the stick, you'll get a beautiful sound out of the drum with virtually no effort at all. Well, now if I want to strike more, great, I can turn the volume up. But you can't turn the volume down. If you're already doing this all the time, how can you get softer or play more dynamically?
When I
Most
evaluate a student's technique or anybody's technique, the first thing I look for is how soft they can play and stay in time.
Right. A great story Louis Belson told me. He said one night he and Buddy got trapped in a snowstorm. They were supposed to be going somewhere doing something. I don't know if this was jazz at the Philharmonic, or I don't know what it was. And he said they stayed up all night in a hotel room with a snare drum between them, competing to see who could play the softest.
That's where it's at, man.
Would you have wanted to be a fly on the wall that night?
Oh man, yeah, I would want to be the snare drum.
Yeah, exactly. So, anyway, this is really where we're going with what Freddie is talking about. So, just to finish the question about books, this is the book that Freddie would use to teach foot technique, and I think I don't know if we set up a foot camp.
Colin, yeah,
Colin Bailey.
Yeah.
Bass drum control. These are all old school books. They're tried and true. And again, what I would say about Freddie is that he didn't, just start at A, and this week it's 34, and next week's page 35, and next week's page 36. No, he used certain sections of the books. He used them in very particular ways. So that, for example, if I was to send you Freddie's notes that he'd scribbled on these pages, you wouldn't have any idea what the hell he was talking about. It was done all as part of this system, of this design of creating the Ferrari: arms, legs, balance, the way we sit, the way we move, how we set the drums up, that we don't, that we're not going to the drums, we're bringing the drums to us. The idea is that we set ourselves up here, and how we set the drums up.
You start with the stool and then you place everything around you so that you can reach them. I start with the stool, then I put the snare drum down, and then I put the bass drum down.
This is a fantastic book. It's fantastic, and I just watched the other day. If you guys out there have not seen Colin Bailey play,
oh, he's amazing.
The guy is
amazing.
He could do more with 1 foot than most guys do with 2.
I think he's,
Really?
I had a discussion with Bruce Becker about it, and Bruce is like, look, man, we all work hard on this material, but the guy has something going on that just allows him to play.
It must be something in his bone structure that we don't have.
I don't know. But I learned a tremendous amount from this. And so let's talk about...
Before we talk about that,
yeah.
we have one question.
Sure.
You need to demonstrate it. Like the method you're talking about, the throw in, throw down, and throw up.
Yeah.
Do 16th notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. One level. And then come down on the first count of the downbeat. 1, 2, 3.
Sure.
Show it in slow motion and fast.
Okay, well...
I want you to demonstrate it.
No, I don't do it,
So the question was, with this idea of throw up, how do you put that, say, into like a 16th note pattern, I guess, on a hi-hat, where maybe you accent the first note. So there's different ways of doing it. This idea of throw up, if we start slow, here I'm doing it in German grip. If I pick up the pace, I'm essentially just bouncing the basketball. Now, is that necessarily the most effective way to play fast 16ths? Probably not, okay? But if you integrate this idea of Moeller, where now we're throwing the stick, this is a wrist thing where we're bouncing it like a basketball. Right. This idea of Moeller now, so we're now using the arm
to initiate the energy.
Together.
Yeah.
Now we're getting 4 for the price of 1. Now we sort of have that thing that he's talking about. Okay. Now, if, for example, and people talk about Moeller, a lot of discussion about Moeller, and at the end of the day, the idea, like half the videos you go to, there's some guy, and it's just like, you almost think like, from the way most people talk about Moeller, that the end product is how fast you can do Moeller, which again has nothing to do with music, okay?
That's right.
So I would certainly not say I'm the world's fastest Moellerer, and nor do I necessarily care. Obviously, I want to get my technique to where I can play fast. But to me, the practical, with everything that I learn, I say, how can I practically use this in a situation, in a musical situation? So to me, where Moeller is very effective is if, say you get your Moeller, and now you add, this is your throw up exercise here, where we're just, again, bouncing it like it's a basketball. We can play very nice singles and you can really get those cranking.
Yeah.
So now that makes sense. So you're playing a rock thing. You know,
Also,
or
it
moving around
helps you
toms.
keep the quarter
Helps
notes.
you keep the pulse, exactly, because you're establishing the pulse. Now, do you want to play a really loud quarter note? Maybe, but maybe you don't. So can you get the quarter note? Can you get this molar up where
Down
everything
here.
sounds even though you're throwing the first stroke, so it doesn't sound accent.
It's hard. That's hard to do.
Yeah, where it's just, you're feeling the pulse, but it's not obvious. So I have this exercise that I'm still working on, but the idea is that here's one way we could play triplets, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we pick that up a little bit, and now here's molar, right? Here's your molar, and the in-between strokes, and then doubles. And now back to the hand.
A lot of people don't understand the concept of.
Here's hand, and now molar. So that in a way, this hand is leading, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and now doubles. Now, how do you get them to sound identical? Right?
That's my question.
Therein lies the rub,
Yeah.
right? And that's the challenge of an exercise like this, is to get them all to sound like. Now, for example, when you do doubles, you know, a lot of people are going to get their triplets to sound like da 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 da, 3 groups of 2.
Yeah.
But we want it to sound like. Right? So it sounds like 2 groups of 3.
Right. That's nice.
Right? And then, so that, you know, when you play it this way, and I'm still, getting back to this is hard, but.
Well, the faster you go, the more the spacing comes together,
Yes.
and the easier it gets to make
There's
it.
this idea of fluidity here. So it's again a long-winded answer to that gentleman's question. But again, this is about the idea of having a lot of tools in the toolbox and being able to apply them in a way that makes sense at that moment, right, for the music. So to get back to sort of this technical idea, I just want to try to expand on this a little bit more. So the idea now is with this idea of tap and stroke, which eventually turns into molar, which is about the arm motion, right? And getting the stick to bounce at every single point and to keep it very fluid. Same thing here. Let me see. Tap, stroke. Tap is just falling, but I turn it in the motion of the stroke, get a nice pop. Eventually, this idea of pop and drop, by the way.
Pop and drop. I like that.
Pop and drop is that we get, again, a stroke followed by a tap, one motion. And when I teach molar, the way Freddie taught molar, it was, you started this slow. Down, tap, up, down.
I still do that every day.
Up, down.
That's how I start my day.
And this is something that Freddie did on all these exercises. I mean, I would, you know, the tap would be like this. 1, and 2, and 3, and. Extremely exacting, extremely disciplined. You set your click to 40.
That's where it begins. Yes.
2, and. Now, why? Why do this? Why slow it down so much that it almost seems unmusical?
So that you can focus and assimilate what you're doing.
Exactly. Clarity. I say this, my students are all laughing if any of them are watching right now. Clarity, articulation, consistency, right? Why do we have both our hands up here? So that every time I drop this and bring it back, it goes to the same place every time. And I do this until this is in my muscle memory. If I jump ahead 3 steps and I don't integrate this, then everything I do down the road isn't going to make sense, right? So
right.
The other benefit of this is when I started doing these exercises at 40, I began to get a clear understanding of space between notes. Now, I have debates with people. You know, of course, students come and the first thing, well, how do I play fast? And what I always say is, if you want to play fast, you got to learn how to play slow.
I always use the example of trumpet players. If you want to play high, if you ever watch a lead trumpet player warm up, he's playing long, low tones. And he gets his lungs here nice and relaxed, and then he can hit all those high notes.
And, you know, the benefit of playing slow, like even a groove. You know, I took for example, this book I did, my first sort of major book project, The Commandments of Early Rhythm and Blues Drumming. The book I did was Zorro, which is, it's essentially it's a historical book, but it's also an instructional book. And the instructional aspect of it is shuffles. And shuffles are based on that quarter note pulse. So I would start by playing shuffles like this. Again, this is ride cymbal, this is snare.
Yeah.
And just playing here. Let it drop. And then you can add this. You know, whatever, different motions, 3 different patterns here. And then finally,
Into
I'm using
the
fingers
straight pattern, yeah.
you know, the full shuffle pattern, and
Yeah.
against different patterns here, and getting that happening. And I just did that for months on end. I took one song, a song called Hard Work by a guy named John Handy, who was like a 1970s soul jazz guy. James Gadsden is the drummer on it.
Yeah.
And I played that song. I looked back after 9 months of getting ready to do the CD for the book. I played it like 435 times, 500 times, you know, without even realizing it. But the slow, then when you compress the amount of space between each note, space equals time, compress the space, there is a clarity and an understanding and an awareness. And when you go from slow to fast, if you work it out slow when you're relaxed, you will want to maintain that relaxation as you get faster.
Well, you
as the
should.
compression happens.
That's the goal.
Exactly. But unfortunately, too many people, their way of playing fast is to tense up, right?
Well, their way
You
of
know.
playing fast is to play fast.
Right.
I mean, to get faster is to keep practicing faster.
Right.
And that's the opposite of what you need to do.
Now, and then I had an argument. A guy came back on Facebook. I posted something about this, and he said, yeah, but in order to play fast, you got to practice fast.
Yeah.
True.
I get that a lot.
I understand that, and that makes perfect sense, yes. But I don't think you will understand how to play fast correctly if you haven't really spent some time understanding the notes.
It's not even that. They wind up with one tempo or two tempos.
Yeah.
They can't adjust their tempo
Yeah.
and their technique to anything else but 208.
And getting comfortable, I agree 100%. Getting comfortable with being able to go 1, and
Yeah. You ask them to slow down, and they can't play it slow. They can't do it.
It's like I always say this, and this is exactly your analogy, that if you think of this as the tempo, ultimate slow, ultimate fast. Most of us, we start and live here most of the time.
Yeah, and the idea is to open,
And the
not to
idea
get
is
up here, but to open
right,
it.
to open it up. So if you force yourself to open this up down here, you know,
This
it's-
opens up
yes,
naturally.
that opens up naturally, and it's challenging, man. It is not easy. You know, I used to go in, Freddie, this is hard, and he would say, Danny, if if it was easy, anybody could do it.
And it wouldn't be worth
Everybody
it.
could do it. Yeah. But the point is, you know, this to me.
But
is what-
anybody can do it if they're willing to do the work.
I agree. It isn't about that, you know, some guy is a genius and has some special magic powers that the rest of us weren't given at birth.
It takes
right?
commitment.
It takes commitment. It takes incredible commitment. And that's why I guess what I say is that I spent, you know, the first 15 years of my career wandering in the desert. I like, you know, just sort of, or being buffeted around in the ocean without a rudder and without a sail. And when I got with Freddie, it was like, okay, now I know how to set my sights. I know how to apply everything, how to bring it all in. You know, so we could go on and on. I mean, we've been going for almost 2 hours. I don't know.
Really?
Are we?
I'm just getting started, man.
I have no problem with the time. It's up to you guys. I need a cigarette. But if
You want to play on the drums a little bit?
First off, before we
Yeah,
do
we
it,
could,
if you want to, but first before you do that, you, Alan, and Daniel, show me your products.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's nice.
Okay.
I mean, there's some comments about they appreciate all your hard work, research, and what you're doing for the drum community.
Oh, you've done a service to the community that's unmatched in my experience, and I'm a pretty old guy.
Thank you. Well, it comes out of passion for me. You know, everything comes out of passion, and also for me, in my historical research, getting into that, what really struck home for me was that I became friends with a lot of the veteran guys, guys that had been forgotten or neglected, or no one had ever even talked about them. I'm not just talking about Earl Palmer or Hal Blaine or guys that were known. You know, I'm talking about guys like Johnny Kirkwood, who played with Louis Jordan from 1950 to 55, played on a bunch of his hits, and was a working drummer in Los Angeles. the amount I got from that guy was priceless. You talk about a lifetime, right? So as I started to know these guys and befriend them, Buddy Herman, down in Nashville, the inventor essentially of country drumming.
Yeah, his son is on.
Buddy Herman Jr. Yeah.
The ultimate guide for drummers.
Yes,
is the group that he administers.
It's a cool Facebook group. Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, Buddy, if you're out
Hey,
there.
buddy.
Anyway, then these guys started to pass away, and I realized and nobody was documenting what their thing was, which was so many different things, and they had so much to offer, and their lives and their experiences, and what did they do on these key records that we all know and love? Rock Around the Clock, Shake, Rattle, and Roll. Just one classic song after another that we sort of take for granted. But guess what? Those were the songs that Charlie Watts was listening to, Ringo Starr
That's
was
right.
listening to,
They
John
influenced.
Bonham was listening
They
to,
influenced
Little Richards.
the next generation.
Yeah, and these guys were all going away, and so then that's when when I became obsessed with, my God, I've got to get the word out about this stuff, So that's kind of where that has come from. But I'll show very quickly. This is the Century Project. Can people see that? Is that?
I think you need to get it on the camera.
Okay.
Stand up and show it.
Yeah.
Want me to do it? I'll do it.
No, that's cool.
No, just get in on
Century
it.
Project, which is a culmination of 12 years of work. It's a 100-year look at the evolution of the drum set as an instrument and how we play it. And it starts in 1865 at the end of the Civil War. At a time when the drum set really was just formulating. The idea of putting multiple pieces together and playing them all at once was really just in its early infancy. And it goes up to the British invasion of 1965. People say, well, why didn't you go forward from there? And my answer is, first of all, it's 100 years. And it's 100 years that people really haven't covered. There's been a lot written about stuff since 1965. But really, the modern drum set and the way that we play it today became codified by the British invasion. Prior to that time, it was a very different instrument, played very differently, and in many different ways during different eras. And that's where my interests lie. And if in this DVD we have 11 different drum sets, vintage kits that we use that are featured. And so I sat down with John Aldridge, one of the experts, on vintage drumming, and we took those 11 kits and tore them apart and put them back together again and talked about every aspect of vintage drums. And that's in this DVD, Traps, which is a 4-hour DVD. And if you're into vintage drums and gear, we sort of tell the same 100-year story, but now specifically from the perspective of the vintage drums. So these two really are a companion set, Century Project and Traps. There's very little information that you find on both of them, so they work well together, supplemental to each other. And it's altogether 7 hours of material.
Wow.
So it's a lot of stuff, a lot of work went into it, but people dig it.
You want to know about your Skype lessons if you give lessons?
Yes, and I teach a lot on Skype. I have students from 4 continents, 4 continents dialing in now. And all of this that I'm showing today, we get into it a lot deeper, obviously. We put it up on the drum set. We apply it to whatever it is that you are doing in your life as a drummer. I don't just mechanically force people to do this for no reason. I want to know what it is you're doing, where you're going, where you want to go. And I've had every kind of drummer under the sun come study with me. And the point is, again, as with Freddie, to take this and apply it towards your individual situation to move you down the path to where you want to go. And it's, if you want to jump into this heavyweight study stuff, I have many students now that have done that. We've really elevated their playing. It's really fantastic for me to watch their growth. It's exciting for me. As you can tell, I'm a passionate person. And if you want to come do one lesson, I do one lesson too. It's all good. There's no rules. As far as I'm concerned, it's all about me trying to facilitate for the student where they want to go. So I got those DVDs. I just brought one of my books today. This is one I did with Zorro. I'll be really quick about this. It's called The Commandments of Early Rhythm and Blues Drumming. It's also kind of a historical journey. There's charts and graphs and photos and tables and maps. And there's also an awful lot of technical information. The idea is that the shuffle pattern was at the heart of all American popular music from the turn of the century, really, the 1900s into the the beginning of the 1900s, up until rock and roll, when the straight eighth pulse really took over. But prior to that time, the shuffle and this idea of a swung eighth feel was permeated all of our popular music. And so what I get into here is looking at all the many ways that that shuffle established itself and how it was a part of swing, how it was a part of rhythm and blues, rockabilly, how it morphed into rock, soul, funk, hip hop, reggae. All of these things have a shuffle feel at their core, and really like painting that picture. And to me, if you want to be a great jazz drummer, start here. Start with being able to play a quarter note and play a shuffle and build on that, right? Because too often we jump into the deep, Ted Reed, John Riley stuff without having an even basic understanding of making a quarter note move down the road. And I'm sure you'd agree with me, Alan and Matt, that as a drummer you could walk into a situation and simply play quarter notes on a cymbal, walk into a jam session. And if you do this and really kill it, really kick ass on that, they're going to love you and want you back.
Yeah.
Whereas if you studied nothing but Elvin Jones patterns and you have no idea how to swing, when you walk into that session, it will mean nothing. All your technique will mean nothing if you don't understand the fundamentals of pulse and of movement of music.
And you won't get work either.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
And that follows you won't get work. I mean, when people talk about groove, my idea of groove is the historical evolution of groove. It's an American art form. Swing, getting music to swing, is something that everyone in the world follows us on. They want to learn from us.
Yep.
And it's really that African American meets European American.
That's
European
right.
Americans had the rudiments. We had the drums. Didn't allow Africans, when we brought them here, we didn't allow them to bring their drums or their music. We forbid it. So what they did was they took their musical sensibilities and laid it on top of our musical fundamentals. And from that has come American popular music.
That happened in New Orleans.
It happened in New Orleans, but it's the feel. And it happened again and again and again, from ragtime right up to hip hop. And that, our popular music, the world loves that. Our American popular music always seems to be the world's popular
They
music.
seem to appreciate it more than Americans do.
Well, yeah,
They
exactly.
want to know about his product.
Yes. And now, Alan Herman.
Oh, okay. So I did a DVD with Billy Martin a couple of years ago called Life on Drums.
And it's fantastic.
Some people like it a lot, I guess. But it's basically it's Billy's concept of how he approaches playing the instrument and playing music. And I sort of did the same thing with him. I sort of sat down and talked to him about all the concepts that he had. And it's pretty entertaining. There's also some extra material. There's some drum solos in it. And there's a segment in there where I talk about Joe Morello, and he talks about some other teachers that he got involved with, where he learned the samba stuff and the clave thing. He studied with a conga player and applied that to a drum set as well. So this could be entertaining. It's also about 2 hours worth of stuff. And then after doing that, I was inspired by Billy because he sort of, it was like a master class for me. So I went ahead and did a CD based on some of the concepts that he gave me during this. And it's a drum solo CD album. It's about 41 minutes of drums in compositional form. I suggest you listen to the whole 40 minutes at once in sequence, because I tried to sort of compose a classical format of small compositions that actually relate to one another or take you in a musical journey from the beginning to the end of the CD. So, and Billy also did another CD I don't have here with his new band, but I unfortunately don't have a copy of it. Called Wicked Knee is his new band. Great. It's sort of, the instrumentation is based on a Dixieland bassist. He doesn't have a bass player, he has a tuba player, trumpet and trombone. And he's playing all of this New Orleans stuff,
Cool.
you know.
Yeah, we'll wrap it. I just want to make one more comment, because I just realized that the gentleman had asked about the Spangalang pattern and movement side,
Yeah.
lateral movement.
Right.
So this is the last Freddie inspired comment. But with Freddie, essentially first you just start up and down and not worry about adding anything else. But
Okay.
the idea is that if you can add a lateral component to it, then you don't have to come up so high. If you can turn it more, come
Well,
out to the
some of
side
the
a
distance
little.
is coming this way is what you're doing.
Yes,
Yeah.
so that can be part of it, so that, eventually we create more of a circular motion. I was talking about Freddie's always talking about circles, and we didn't even get into feet today, but there's a lot of stuff, ideas and concepts with feet as well, with the pedal, similar to this. If you think of the tip of the stick being the beater ball, of the pedal coming out, and of you setting up a more complete
Yeah.
motion that allows
Most
for
rock
fluid.
players, they
Bury it,
they bury it into their head, and also kills any tone.
Any reverberation.
I mean, not that you shouldn't do that. I do that, but I do that as an alternate sound. And you can get two different bass drum sounds if you keep it open by pressing in or letting it breathe.
Yes, and that's again a choice. And I say
Right.
you shouldn't have to play one way because that's the only way
That's
that
right.
you know how
Yeah,
to do it.
everything should be intentional.
Everything should be intentional. Exactly right. So anyway, we barely scratched the surface.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
But we're going to continue.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
We're gonna do this again, right?
Oh, yeah,
No,
right.
and when you get off camera, we're going to go out and have
Yeah.
dinner and
we're gonna go. Alan only lives like 5 blocks away from me in New
That's
York.
right,
so
we're
gonna-
neighbors, and
now
yeah.
we're never coming out of the shed. We're like, oh yeah, well okay, well how about that?
They're
But
wondering whether you're gonna come back and do another show, both of you guys, or individually, or however you wanna do it. So you're being invited by them, not me.
Oh,
great.
well, I'd love to do another show
As
with
you
you.
can tell, neither one of us has a problem talking, especially me after I've had. I apologize if I talked too much here.
No, I apologize to you if I interrupt you.
No, not at all. So anyway, and if you have any questions, I love the interaction.
Is David in the audience?
David can't go in the chat room, but he's watching.
He's on. I want to say hi to David Stanek. He's out there watching us, by the
Dave
way.
Stanek.
Yeah,
Yeah, hey,
Stanek. I always
Dave.
say his name wrong. Dave Stanek,
One
how
of
are
the great-
you?
One of the greats.
Hmm?
He's giving a lesson.
He's giving a lesson?
He is. I'm sure he's giving a lesson
Oh, yeah.
somewhere,
he's-
somehow.
Oh, yeah. But
So, yeah.
I wanted to say hi to you, David.
So anyway, I'm available through all the typical channels, danielglass.com, Facebook, all of that jazz, I'm sure.
You can find me in Matt's rooms, actually. I administer the rooms.
Chat rooms, yeah,
Yeah.
we're all over the chat rooms and talking about drums.
And
But,
I have a YouTube channel as well with a lot of video with demonstrating what I do.
Fantastic. So thanks again. Thanks for your time, and thanks for your understanding and having an open awareness to try to digest some of this stuff, because it's deep, man. It is deep, and
And-
it's, like you said, it's not something. It's an hour discussion. It's a lifetime.
Yeah.
It really is.
And thank you, Dan, for coming and sharing your experience and knowledge with us.
Yeah,
Sure.
I've been trying to find out about Freddie for years, and you've really given me a good picture of,
Oh, good.
and a good feel for
Because
him.
I hope sometimes I'm afraid that I'll just confuse people. And Freddie, by the way, the last story about Freddie, he used to say, "Don't show anybody this stuff because they're not going to get it, and they're just going to think you're nuts." And so anyway, it's good stuff. I call it truth. It's truth. It's not my truth. It's not me saying I know the truth. It's like what you said. It's physics. It's hard to deny. If you set this up, boop, and the stick pops, that's what you want to happen.
It's gonna
a
happen every
physical
time.
Response.
Yeah.
Anyway, you can thank me also, and you can tell him to come sign up for lessons, whoever wants to.
We
Oh,
gotta thank
yeah,
Matt
yeah,
Patella
yeah.
for hosting this. He's an amazing educational force on the internet. Matt Patella Live Lessons.com. Matt Patella Live Lessons.com. He's making this possible. He's created a really wonderful community. He creates these wonderful events, bringing out world-class guys. Mike Clark. Who else has been out here?
John Berger.
Jason Gianni.
John
John
Berger, who is a
Berger.
very experienced Broadway,
Great Broadway New York
classical musician.
Yeah, and so get involved. Get involved in
Yeah.
the conversations, the discussions, the bloody battles on Facebook. It's all good, man. It's all good.